Hello again. One reason I get irritated with all the pseudo-history and pseudo-archaeological claims around Egypt, things that, well, for example, they invented calculus and geometry, stuff like that, is that this kind of thing obscures the real achievements of the Egyptians, which were absolutely immense. As far as we can tell, civilization arose spontaneously in Egypt at roughly the same time that it did in Mesopotamia, which is modern day Iraq, and also around Syria, Israel, Lebanon, to use the modern names of the places. The Egyptians certainly had contact with those other nations in the Fertile Crescent, but they also invented an awful lot of the stuff entirely by themselves. When people write these crank books try to persuade us that Egyptian civilization came from outer space, was brought by aliens or from refugees, survivors from Atlantis, or lost black civilizations from the Sahara, it's a way of putting the Egyptians down, of making it look as though they were too dim to come up with all these ideas for themselves. So, stripping away all the fairly modern nonsense, what did the Egyptians achieve? Well, it doesn't sound particularly romantic or exciting, but they invented the plough, the first ploughs that we know of. Descriptions of the first ploughs and archaeological remains are from Egypt about 5,000 years ago. The invention of the plough made it possible for settled communities to grow and expand because, of course, they could cultivate land and grow their own food. And that made a great change. That was one of the things that precipitated the growth of civilizations in the Fertile Crescent, development of the plough. The use of fertilizer was another. The discovery that if you put rotted vegetable matter and excrement on your fields, it will increase the yield of the crops. That started in Egypt as well. Irrigation was another of those things that the Egyptians were pioneers in. I realised that things like ploughs and the idea of putting shit on your fields when you're growing things aren't as exciting as some of the claims that we see made about Egypt, but they have the advantage of being verifiable and real. In other words, we can be sure of them. Another example would be the development of the arch, the architectural feature of the arch. The earliest known example of that is around 3000 BC in Egypt, and it indicates that they came up with the idea for themselves. So nobody told them how to make arches, they invented it. It was remarkable. As I say, one of the things that I find enormously irritating about some of the mad theories floating around about Egypt, and I'm thinking here of books like Fingerprints of the Gods, Black Genesis, the Orion Mystery, things like that. The annoying thing about these sorts of books is that they deny that the Egyptians could have thought of anything for themselves. Everything had to come from outside. If they made ploughs or they built arches, it can only be because someone taught them how to do it. In the Fingerprints of the Gods, the idea is that survivors of the lost continent of Atlantis, which the author says was in the Antarctic, that they came and taught the Egyptians how to do things. Another book is the Orion Mystery, and in that one it was aliens from outer space that taught the Egyptians how to do things. The same man that wrote the Orion Mystery wrote a book called Black Genesis, and that suggests that there was a highly developed civilization in the Sahara, again, which came to Egypt and showed them how to do things. These theories smack a little of colonialism. It's as though we can't accept that the natives there in Egypt could possibly have devised all these things themselves. They simply must have had help. And I find that offensive, quite honestly. Apart from anything else, the DNA evidence all suggests that Egypt, the Egyptian people grew there in that area by themselves, and that all their civilization was based on things that people alone did, if you see what I mean. There was no admixture of other DNA except a sprinkling of European and Near Eastern traits. So That's one of the reasons that I get annoyed about this, and it's one of the reasons that I'm making videos attacking crank science. I thought it might be interesting to look at one more thing that the Egyptians did for us, and that's give us the basis for our alphabet. Hieroglyphs in Egypt and cuneiform in Mesopotamia, which I say was Iraq, were both around for thousands of years, but they weren't very practical for everyday use. It was all right if you were a scribe and you were taught how to draw hieroglyphics and to write or to use cuneiform, but ordinary people didn't use them. What was a brilliant idea was an invention that would allow ordinary people to write and to read, to introduce literacy to the world. And although there's some debate as to when this happened, it was almost 4,000 years ago, we're not quite sure whether it happened in Israel or the Sinai or in Egypt, but some people devised the alphabet, which means you just need a couple of dozen signs and you can write anything at all you want. It's dead easy. The people that devised that alphabet based some of the things, some of the signs, upon the hieroglyphs. For example, this is the Egyptian hieroglyph for water. This sign shows waves on the surface of a sea, and that's why the sign is called water. Those who invented the alphabet took this sign, the Egyptian hieroglyph for water, and they used it for in their own language. In Hebrew, water is mime, and it's much the same in Phoenician and very similar to in Akkadian, Babylonian. So they took the sign and they called it mime, water. This is a Phoenician sign that was based upon the hieroglyph. That's the Phoenician letter M, and they called that mem, which is just an abbreviation of mime. In the course of time, we adapted that letter as well, and we shortened both the form of the letter, so it was just one little jagged thing, and we shortened the name. We dropped the initial M and called it M rather than mem, and so we have the modern letter M. There is therefore a direct line between the Egyptian hieroglyphs for the letter M and the letter on your keyboard, on the computer that you're using right now. The other letters, I can talk all day about this, the other letters are also similarly connected with Egypt, but we don't have time to go into all that. That's a real thing which Egypt gave the world, all by themselves. They didn't need any lost civilizations or aliens to help them either.